When I was a kid, I used to love watching this one animated sitcom about the adventures of a dysfunctional Northern American family. Every evening at 6, I would park myself in front of the TV and wait for it to begin. I often like to think that the characters in the show were my own family. I won't say their names. I can't. I'm not allowed to, but there was a bumbling dad, a mom with tall blue hair, an unruly son, a brilliant-minded daughter, and a baby girl who completed their family. You see, there was a lot of shouting and physical violence in my home while I was growing up. This TV show, let's just say it was my tiny window looking out to happiness. I didn't have any friends at school, and I never needed any because I always had my fam to hang out with on the playground. One day, there was this one episode that changed everything. It was Hallows Eve 1995. I eagerly sat in my room and waited for the show to begin. It was gonna be a Halloween special, and those ones were always my favorite. So I sat there waiting with my bag of Skips and my strawberry Chewits bar until it finally came on. The spooky intro theme started to play, making me completely forget about how my dad had belted me earlier on that day before he went off to work. After the quintessential couch gag, the show began. I seemed to notice that there was something odd about this episode. The characters were drawn weird, hand-sketched, and more realistic as opposed to the bubbly cartoonish look. And they looked older. At least 10 years older. Except for Mag... the baby. For some reason, she still looked the same. When collapsing down onto his favorite brown couch, he had a bottle of beer in his hand. He was shirtless and his zipper was down. The next scene showed the mom in the kitchen pulling her dress up to her torso. Her sickly yellow face and naked breasts were covered in purple-red bruises. The next scene showed the son. He was in his room, snorting up what looked like white powder off from his desk. The scene after that showed the daughter. She was dressed provocatively. Her face was caked in makeup, and she was using a knife to make incisions on her inner thighs. The scene cut back to the dad walking up the stairs, going through the corridor and stopping at the daughter's door. He looked down at her. His sausage-like fingers crawled into his pants and his mouth curled into a greedy smile. The door of the room shut closed with a bang, and the daughter started to scream. The baby daughter of the family started to wail at the top of her lungs. The son was in his room, curled up on his bed with a pillow over his face, all the while the mom sat in the kitchen, soullessly staring into the dirty corner. And then fade to black. That ever-annoyingly happy, pro-Christian neighbor sat alone in his empty living room as he sang Glory Hallelujah to himself. He was blind in one eye, both of his legs had been amputated, and one of his arms had shrunk. Written on the wall in blood were the words, "God, where were you?" After he finished his song, he pulled out a revolver, placed it into his mouth, and fired. The blood filled the screen. The blood slowly dripped away, revealing the next scene. It was night now. The dad was fast asleep on his couch. I watched as the mom quietly crept into the living room with a machete in her hand. I watched as her shadow loomed over the husband. She raised the weapon above her head. She swung it down. His head popped off like a bottle cap of a Duff bottle. She then made her way upstairs, machete in hand. She first stopped at her son's room. He was lying on the floor, his face barely visible beneath the pool of blood he had gurgled out. She walked towards her daughter's room and peered in to find her hanging from the ceiling fan. She walked towards the end of the corridor and stepped into the baby's room. The little baby girl looked up at her mom and sweetly smiled. I was relieved to watch the mom drop the machete and gently pick the baby up. The baby buried her little head into her mom's bosom and closed her eyes. The mom slowly walked all the way back up the corridor and stopped at the foot of the stairs. She just stood there in silence for a few suspended moments. Her blood-struck, weeping eyes stared right at me through the screen as though she were pleading me for help. I never realized how sad and dark the mom's eyes were. They were just like my mother's. She eventually lowered her gaze from me and her lips began to quiver. She threw herself down the steps, the baby girl still in her arms. Their bones crackled and snapped all the way down to the bottom. They just laid together in a crumpled heap. Their eyes were blank, like the whites of eggs. The credit roll came on as normal, and the show ended with sounds of the 20th Century Fox fanfare. I sat alone in my room. My family, they were dead. That night, when I went to sleep, I saw a vision of hell in my dreams. Hell is not some fiery red canyon that people plunge into. Hell itself is a greedy, overindulged demon, violating and eating each of its damned residents without rest or mercy. This happened to me when I was 8. I spent years of my adult life looking for that episode that I watched that day. I streamed each season, studied cast and crew interviews. I even posted on the official message board of their website, wanting to know if anyone else knew about that episode. My post was deleted within minutes of me putting it up, and my account was banned. I ended up getting a cease and desist letter and threats of a libel case as a reply if I didn't shut the F up. One day when I was walking home from work, someone came up to me and sprayed a hot liquid in my face. I thought it was battery acid. It turned out to be heated, thick yellow paint. And I knew from that day that happiness was just one big, horrible, hilarious lie, soaked in yellow paint.